Thank you for having me. Thank you to the organisers of the conference for the invitation to speak and share sea forest with you all today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Palawa Pakana of Lutruwita, the traditional owners of the land which sea forest operates, and the sea country which it utilises to grow its product. We'd like to pay respects to traditional owners and elders, past, present and emerging. My name is Sam Elsom. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sea Forest, an environmental technology company established to address two of the most significant challenges of our time: fighting climate change and producing more food with fewer resources. We are located down here on the southeast coast of Tasmania, where we have a land-based facility growing seaweed and also a very large marine lease inside the Maria Island. We are one of the first companies in the world to produce commercially an Asparagopsis-based feed supplement, which has the power to mitigate up to 98% of methane being produced from ruminant livestock. I come to this space not as an academic, but as someone determined to use business to create positive environmental outcomes. As we all sit here, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 is at its highest level in approximately 800,000 years. Our oceans have increased in acidity by 26% in the last 3 decades. We are now living in a world that the climate scientists have been predicting for quite a while. They tell us in order to avoid the 1.5 degrees of warming, which now seems imminent, we have to halve global emissions by 2030. And this is an absolutely enormous undertaking, and an undertaking at which seaweed has a surprisingly exciting role to play as a solution. At Sea Forest, we are pioneering not only the cultivation of Asparagopsis, a novel and native seaweed to Australia and New Zealand, which when fed in very small dietary inclusions to ruminant livestock, has the ability to significantly reduce methane emissions, but we're also pioneering the development of a new and environmentally positive industry. Before starting Sea Forest, I was in the fashion industry. I spent about 18 years in my career in creative direction and had developed a business called Elsom, which was a sustainable apparel business focusing on supply chain transparency and measuring the impacts, both environmental and social, of how our garments came to be. Seeing firsthand the overuse of pesticides in developing countries and how the downstream impacts that would have on small communities relying on that same waterway for cooking, drinking and bathing. And people were getting sick frequently. Seeing overcrowded factories full of some of the lowest paid workers in the world producing garments that when we go and window shop on the main street, we have no visibility on how that comes to be. And so the business's focus was around trying to bring that transparency to consumers. You know, as a passionate environmentalist and a member of the Climate Council, I had a growing awareness of climate change and the impacts that it was going to have on our way of life. And you know, the catalyst for me really in terms of the shift of career came about after I became a father. And my focus not only became on my own world and surroundings and my own lifestyle, but that of my children and their children and future generations on this planet. So I guess the year was 2017, and I was listening to Tim Flannery of the Climate Council talk about a recent IPCC report that had come out showing graphs with an exponential rate of change that we stand to face as a result of these increasing carbon concentrations, and feeling both vulnerable and anxious and frankly angry about the fact that we have as one individual such a limited capacity to create a difference. But it was in the same conversation that Tim began to talk about possible solutions, and one of those was seaweed. Seaweed is what we call a zero input crop. It doesn't rely on finite resources like fresh water or inputs such as pesticides or fertilizers. And they grow incredibly quickly. So unlike terrestrial plants, where only the leaves photosynthesize and the nutrients come in from the soil and the roots, with seaweeds being immersed in ocean water, the entire organism is always photosynthesizing, and as a result has the capacity to grow up to 30 times faster than land-based plants. And so, with 71% of the Earth's surface surrounded by ocean, seaweeds hold amazing potential not only to capture huge amounts of carbon, but create habitat, which has the co-benefits of creating, shelter and support for other marine species. But it also has a role to play in food security, and also, in this instance, in livestock feed supplements, which have the capacity to reduce methane emissions, which then, as a result, contribute to that emissions reduction target that we need in the planet. But what I learned early on was that seaweed is also a very complicated science. And at Sea Forest, we took about an 18-month journey in just R&D on how we could cultivate this particular seaweed. We had collaborations with multiple universities. We had a baseline knowledge supported by the Professor Rocky Denise and his esteemed colleagues, and we met weekly. We had we understood the knowledge gaps. We had a great understanding of what we did know, and then we met weekly, and we just divided and conquered, and we made rapid progress over a relatively short period of time, to a point where now we have developed both a method for cultivation on land and also at sea. But I can't stress enough the importance of that scientific journey and the complexity behind what it takes to grow seaweed and develop cultivation methodologies. So I became fascinated with seaweed as a solution and began to research what possible seaweeds might be a viable species for cultivation here in Australia, and learned that while seaweed is an $11 billion industry globally, that we are less than $1 million of an industry here in Australia. And really that's because most of those species that are grown at scale around the world are Northern Hemisphere endemic, and they can't be grown here in Australia in our oceans. And so it was about finding a species of seaweed that we would be able to develop a seaweed aquaculture industry around. And that's when I stumbled on the CSIRO work that was underway with Dr. Nigel Tompkins and Professor Rocky Denise of James Cook University, who had collaborated on this idea of feeding 30 different varieties of seaweed to livestock to see the impact that would have on methane mitigation. That was part of the National Livestock Methane Program, and really was established on the back of MLA, which is Meat and Livestock Australia industry body, 2030 carbon neutral target which had been set. And they're exploring lots of R&D ventures to see how we might be able to deliver that outcome. This amazing research by Australia's peak science body delivered a very surprising outcome, and that is that this one seaweed was an outstanding performer. A very small, just 0.2% of this seaweed included in the diet of the ruminant could not only mitigate methane, but lead to an increase in productivity. And so this became the focus. And thanks to Rocky, who is now our chief scientist, and to Nigel, who's head of agricultural development, we're building Sea Forest as a leader in the commercial supply of Asparagopsis to the livestock sector. We're absolutely committed to providing regional employment opportunities. Having grown from just Stephen, Dion and myself to now having over 44 individuals on the payroll, all at the cutting edge of world-leading science, and all with a shared mission for our environmental goals. The company has made some amazing achievements over a short time frame. We're developing unique IP in the cultivation of seaweed and therefore the at-scale supply of the product. And we are now at the very exciting stage of commercialisation. Sea Forest is an environmental technology company pioneering the development of a new and environmentally positive industry in seaweed aquaculture. And the important takeaway here is that this is an opportunity for Australia to decarbonise Australian agriculture, develop this new and environmentally positive industry, and to have a competitive advantage ahead of the rest of the world. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to join you all tonight, albeit virtually, and I apologise for not being there in person. I want to welcome you all to visit us sometime down here in Tasmania, and please reach out either via email or through the website. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Good night.